Hello, and welcome to the Career Compass program, which includes online learning sessions, podcasts, videos, webinars, white papers, and whiteboard videos, all specifically designed for NAVFAC. Please check the Career Compass Resource Center, or CCRC, often for updates and new content to support your learning. This content will assist with learning and development within the 20 non-technical competencies outlined in the Workforce Development Strategy. The topic of today's webinar is Succeeding Through Setbacks in support of the initiative competency. Throughout this video, you will see a paper or pencil icon on some slides, indicating a workbook activity. When you see this icon on the top left corner, this means I'll be asking you to write something in your workbook or refer to your workbook. If possible, download the workbook from the Career Compass Resource Center, or CCRC, before continuing with this course. However, if you are not able to, just use any piece of paper and write your thoughts down on that. You can always transfer that to the workbook later. Today you will learn why failure should be viewed as a learning tool and valuable tips for overcoming setbacks. How does this tie into the initiative competency? Initiative means that you take responsibility for yourself and that you take the necessary steps for your success. When you suffer setbacks, whether it's at work or in a personal situation, it's up to you to pick yourself up, continue on, and strive for excellence. No one else can do that for you. First, we'll talk about setbacks and failures. Then we'll go through some tips that you can start using right away to move forward when you experience a setback or failure. Let's do some celebrity trivia. Do you recognize this person? If you do, write her name on page 3 of your workbook. There's a good chance you recognized Oprah Winfrey here. Oprah is best known for her talk show, The Oprah Winfrey Show, that ran in national syndication for 25 years. But she's also a television producer, actress, author, and philanthropist. What you probably don't know is that Oprah struggled early on in life and had to overcome multiple setbacks and failures before she got where she is today. She suffered from poverty and abuse during childhood, but still managed to excel in school, put herself through college, and landed a job as a primetime news co-anchor. And even then, she suffered yet another major setback when that show failed and she was demoted. But she picked herself up and went on to become an international sensation. She's now a multi-billionaire and considered to be one of the most influential women in the world. Recognize this guy? If you do, write his name on page 3 of your workbook. This is Steve Jobs. He was the chairman, CEO, and co-founder of Apple, another multi-billionaire. But what you might not know is, during his initial tenure at Apple, his style of leadership was seen as very poor and led to adverse effects for those working there. After an internal power struggle, he was actually fired from his own company. Understandably so, he saw this as a huge personal failure. But he did not just fade away into the sunset. He went on to successfully spin Pixar films off from Lucasfilms, and eventually returned to Apple and successfully led the company to new heights, leading the charge on developing the Apple operating system, which has revolutionized technological devices. Alright, last one. This is one that may be a little bit more challenging. Anyone recognize her? Write her name on page 4 of your workbook if you do. You might not have recognized who this is, but you certainly know of the empire she created. J.K. Rowling is the author of the incredibly successful Harry Potter fantasy book series, which has sold over 500 million copies and been turned into films. It's the best-selling book series in history, but Rowling's road to success was also paved with setbacks. She reflects back on her own life and says when she looks back on her early adulthood, she feels she failed on an epic scale. She says she had an extremely short-lived marriage that imploded, was jobless, a single parent, and she says she was as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. Let's talk about what all three of these people have in common, other than the fact that they are all billionaires. Write in your workbook on page 4 some characteristics you think these three have in common. Pause the video and resume when you are ready. Some traits you may have written down are perseverance, resilience, and courage. Oprah Winfrey, Steve Jobs, and J.K. Rowling did not see failure as the end of the road, but instead chose to see it as a tool towards success. They took the initiative and used failure as an opportunity to do some soul-searching to figure out how they could get back on track. They did not let the failure define their life. For example, Oprah figured out that just reading the news was not her strength. Her strength is more connecting to the human and emotional side of the stories. So once she made that realization and was able to develop a show that much better suited that strength, she was able to capitalize on her strength and become successful. Taking that approach can be very difficult. We've all experienced setbacks. Let's spend the rest of this course talking about how you can start to look at failure in a different way and what you can do if you experience setbacks. Unfortunately, this course can't teach you how to reinvent yourselves to be billionaires, but learning these skills can be pretty valuable too. We've looked at three very famous people and see that they were able to overcome major setbacks or failure and achieve great success. But what about you? What struggles have you had to deal with? What setbacks might you be encountering? I'd like you to reflect for just a moment on a specific failure you've dealt with and how you handled it. Preferably, think about something in your work life, but if you can't think of anything there, pull from your personal life, and sometimes the two are intertwined. Pause the video and resume when you're ready. You'll be able to apply the tips you learned today in order to be better equipped to overcome past and future setbacks. Your first reaction to me saying failure should not be seen as negative may be one of disbelief. You might think, that's just a way of rewriting history so that we don't feel bad about the situation. I understand why you may feel that way, and let's talk about how we can reframe that. How do you react to failure? Do you let it get you down? A lot of us are perfectionists. We always strive to get everything right. But that can actually be a recipe for paralysis. If you're always doing the safe thing, you may not fail, but you're also not going to make great strides in learning and moving forward. Success is not a straight line. It is natural to have setbacks. It's how you handle those setbacks that matters. Instead of viewing failure as a negative, we need to change our perspective a bit and start to view it more as a learning experience. Don't just think of it as a cliché, but actually internalize that and believe it. We perceive failure much more severely than success. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two Israeli psychologists, describe a phenomenon called loss aversion, which basically states that the effect of failure on humans is about twice that of a gain from a win. So to put that in practical terms, for example, if you lost money in the stock market, you would likely be more upset about that than the happiness you would feel if you gained the same amount of money. This really translates to all aspects of our life. If we make a mistake at work, we tend to feel worse about that than how good we would feel if we received a compliment at work. So why is that? Why do we react so much more strongly to failure than success? Well, there are many reasons for that, but here are some of the major factors. 3 types of obstacles you may be experiencing that don't allow you to see failure as a learning experience are blame, whether it's blaming yourself or others, having a fixed mindset, and being fearful. So let's address all of those individually. Let's talk about blame. When failure occurs, our first instinct is to blame ourselves and/or others. Hopefully, without sounding too much like a psychiatrist, I will say that linking failure to blame is a societal norm and begins in childhood. As children, We're taught that when we fail, it's admirable to take the blame, and wanting to blame others for failures is just human nature. But there's a difference between taking responsibility for your actions and just placing blame. Assigning blame to yourself or others isn't going to help the situation. It will only make you feel badly, or in the case of blaming others, takes the control out of your hands. If you blame others, then there's nothing for you to fix or overcome, right? Having a fixed mindset can prevent us from seeing failure as a positive. With a fixed mindset, you see failure as the end of the road. You think, well, that didn't work, and instead of trying again, just give up. If you happened to attend our Culture of Lifetime Learning webinar last month, you learned about fixed versus growth mindsets. When you have a fixed mindset, you basically assume that everything about you is already set in stone. Your character, your intelligence, your creativity, everything. So if you have a fixed mindset, you try to avoid failure because you see it as a statement about yourself rather than an opportunity. Shifting attitudes to a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset puts the failure in a different perspective. Now, instead of seeing that failure as something negative, it can be embraced as an opportunity to learn and succeed. There have been lots of studies done with children to test the difference between fixed and growth mindsets. They found that kids who fail a test and had fixed mindsets reacted by cheating next time, not trying at all, or finding out who around them did worse than they did so they could feel better about themselves. Kids with growth mindsets looked at the situation completely differently. They perceived it as they had not succeeded yet. They studied harder and figured out what they had to do to pass, and then did pass. We develop these mindsets as kids and then carry them on to adulthood subconsciously. But if you are someone who tends toward having a fixed mindset, this doesn't mean you can't change once you're aware of it. Another obstacle to seeing failure as a learning opportunity is fear. This can be our own personal fear or, as leaders, fear of encouraging failure. Let's talk about personal fear first. Again, this is a totally normal and human response. We fail, and that doesn't feel good, right? Usually, at least initially, there will be some unpleasant consequences from that failure. So natural instinct is not to want to feel that way again. So either consciously or subconsciously, instead of wanting to learn from the failure and try something again, we decide that it's self-preservation to not try again, so that we won't fail again. Ironically, what we do out of self-preservation actually ends up being self-sabotaging. As a leader, you may be afraid to encourage failure of your employees or team members because you may feel like that is encouraging mediocrity. You may think telling people it's okay to fail means you're telling them not to try hard. But that's a totally false choice. Encouraging your team not to be afraid of failure is not the same thing as telling them not to try their hardest. It's giving them the freedom they need to take risks and think outside the box and to push boundaries. Take Amazon, for example. Jeff Bezos, one of the richest, if not the richest man in the world, built Amazon from scratch, and he is known for encouraging a culture where failure is embraced as a tool for success. He said, if you're going to take bold bets, they're going to be experiments, and if they're experiments, you don't know ahead of time if they're going to work. Experiments are by their very nature prone to failure, but a few big successes compensate for dozens and dozens of things that didn't work. So don't be afraid to let your team know that it's okay to fail. And don't worry, they will not interpret this as an invitation to slack off. For you personally, what do you think is your biggest reason for seeing failure as a negative? Is it one of the reasons we just talked about, or something else? To review, the 3 reasons we just talked about were blame, having a fixed mindset, and fear. Do any of those resonate with you? Pause the video and record your thoughts on page 6 of your workbook. Resume the video when you're ready. We've talked about why we should start to look at failure differently. Now let's talk about what you can do when you experience setbacks or failure. Here are some tips you can use. Reflect on the reasons for the failure. Develop SMART goals. Commit to your personal development. Know where to get advice. And visualize success and celebrate small wins. We'll talk about each one of these in more detail. How can you prevent the problem from happening again? Hindsight is always 20/20, so think about what knowledge you've gained and look back and try to figure out what went wrong so it doesn't happen again. Yes, we did say failure was not a negative thing, but it is an opportunity for learning, so repeating the same mistakes is what you want to avoid. Try to be objective about it instead of judging yourself or blaming others. Look at the facts of the situation and try to figure out where things went wrong and what could have been done differently. Some questions you can ask yourself are: what was I trying to accomplish? What went wrong? At what point did things start to veer off the right track? And why did things start to go off track? The key here is to really do an objective analysis of what went wrong. Do not dwell in the negative. In fact, you may want to give yourself a time limit for this exercise, after which you stop looking back and just move forward. You can accept responsibility in the failure, but don't place blame. You may also want to think about keeping a learning journal, where you actually write down your thoughts and reflections on what happened. You can record insights and lessons learned, so that if you do need to refer to them in the future, they are there for you, but you don't need to actively keep thinking about it. Now it's time to put the lessons you learned into practice. Just knowing why you encountered a setback isn't enough. You need to actively take steps to prevent that from happening again if possible, and to move forward. One way you can do that is to set what's known as SMART goals. SMART is an acronym where S stands for specific. You want to be very clear here on what you're trying to achieve. M stands for measurable. There has to be a way to actually measure your success. A stands for attainable. Don't set unrealistic goals. That's just setting yourself up for failure. You can be aspirational and optimistic, but don't set it as something that's just not going to work. R stands for relevant. Make sure your goal is actually relevant. What you're doing actually needs to have a real purpose. You don't want to set a goal just for the sake of setting a goal. Especially in the context of work and NAVFAC, make sure that your goal aligns with NAVFAC's goals and missions. Otherwise, it's not going to be successful. And lastly, T stands for time-bound. You want to have a clearly defined timeline, ideally with a specific start date and a target date of when you want to complete your goals. Let's go through an example together. When it comes to exercise, we often have lofty goals but fall short. SMART goals can really work well here. Many people say they would like to be more fit, but is that a SMART goal? No, because it is very vague. How do you measure being fit? It is relevant. We all want to be more fit, to be healthier, but there's also no timeline here. So to really achieve this goal, we need to be smart. An example of a SMART goal here could be, I want to be able to run 5 miles by Thanksgiving. It's specific. I want to be able to run 5 miles. It's measurable. 5 miles is a concrete distance. I can use an Apple Watch, a map, or GPS to measure it. It's attainable. Depending on what kind of shape you're in, you could always tweak this, but 5 miles is typically a pretty good beginning goal. It's relevant. Cardiovascular exercise is part of what any health expert would consider being fit. And again, lastly, it's time-bound. There's a specific deadline: Thanksgiving. Let's go through another example. I really want you to get a good grasp on this because if you can master this, it's a huge step to being able to move forward after a failure. What do you think? Is this a SMART goal? I want to be a better leader. I'm going to start meeting with my individual reports so that I can build a better rapport with them. If you need to think about that for a moment, pause the video and resume when you're ready. You can record your thoughts on page 8 of your workbook. The answer is no. This is not a SMART goal. It is not very specific. What does being a better leader mean? This is very vague. It is not measurable. There's nothing to measure here. It may be attainable, but again, what we're trying to attain is very vague. It is relevant. Most leaders would say they'd like to be better leaders, but again, what does it mean? And this goal is not time-bound. There's absolutely no timeline associated with it. So how can we turn this goal into a SMART goal? Please pause the video and think about how you could take this goal and turn it into a SMART goal. Record your thoughts on page 8 of your workbook and resume the video when you're ready. Here's an example of how the previous goal could be turned into a SMART goal. Each quarter, I will schedule a 15-minute one-on-one meeting with each of my reports. I will ask them what concerns they have and how I can better support them as a leader. This goal is specific. I'm doing one-on-ones with my reports. It's measurable. I am meeting in 15-minute increments. It's attainable. Once a quarter seems totally reasonable unless you have a very large number of direct reports, in which case this could be adjusted. It's relevant. It's important for leaders to build relationships with their direct reports. And lastly, it's time-bound. We're giving a specific time frame here. It will happen once every quarter. So again, if you're trying to overcome a setback, setting a SMART goal is something you can do to help yourself succeed next time. You should also commit to your personal development. This ties in with working on developing a growth mindset. So instead of just remaining stagnant, embrace things that allow you to constantly learn and grow. How can you do that? There are an infinite number of ways. For example, TED Talks, podcasts, start a morning routine that energizes you, or reading more. One other really important thing you can do to commit to your personal development is to complete an IDP, or Individual Development Plan. Many of you may already have completed one, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to do so. You can access the IDP page on the CCRC by clicking on Employee Resources on the main page. From there, you can click on Individual Development Plan to access the IDP page. On this page, you can learn more about how to complete your IDP as well as download the form. The IDP is a tool for you to be able to really define your goals and then identify opportunities available to you to make those happen. Meeting about this with your supervisor then also makes you more accountable to actually do what you say you're going to do. When you embrace growth and learning, you literally are growing your brain. Neural networks in your brain grow new connections, and existing ones are strengthened, setting you up for success in the future. Many of you may feel like you're on your own. If you fail, you try to hide that failure from others because you don't want them to perceive you in a negative light. But it's important to realize that you are not alone, and it can actually be a huge help to loop others in on what you're experiencing. Chances are, you have friends, colleagues, or supervisors who have experienced similar issues or setbacks and may be able to give you advice. So even though sometimes it can feel embarrassing to admit failure, don't let that stop you from reaching out to others for advice. You can do this informally or formally. Seize mentoring and/or coaching opportunities. Find someone who can help guide you. If you want to go the formal route, there are resources for you on the CCRC for how to do that. One other thing you might try is making someone your accountability partner. This means that you share your specific goals with someone and then ask them to hold you accountable. So this might mean they check in with you via email once a week to see how things are going. Or they might call you once a month and ask, Have you done X, Y, and Z in order to complete your goal? Knowing that someone is going to be checking in on your progress can be a huge motivating factor in making sure you stay on track to succeed. The list is endless. Everyone has been through setbacks and failures. Finding someone that has successfully navigated through them, and it doesn't have to be the same exact scenario as you experienced, can help you chart your course for success. When you're recovering from failure and setback, visualize yourself succeeding. I know it may sound corny, but bear with me here. There is actual scientific research to back this up. Research shows that when you go into a task with a positive mindset about the outcome, performance improves. Many athletes do this. Before a game or match or competition, they actually picture themselves winning, holding a trophy, or standing up on the podium. So picture what success looks like for you and work towards that goal. Set small intermediate goals or milestones, and then celebrate those as you achieve them. This is something that literally takes no work on your part. It's so easy to do this, and you have nothing to lose. So even if you don't totally believe me or buy into this, do it anyway. It can only help. Remember, you always have options. Don't get stuck in your own head. We all have failures and setbacks, and you are not alone. Any setback you have, use the tips you learned today and forge a path forward. You will learn a lot about yourself in the process. Now, I have a couple of questions for you. You don't need to have an answer right now if you want to take some time to think about it. What did you take from this learning session that you can apply to your current position today? And what is the most important tip you would share with a coworker? You can enter your reflections in your workbook on page 9 in the next couple of days. I want to thank you for attending today and for your active participation in this course. If you have any questions that were not addressed here today, please reach out to BD17HQs at NAVFAC-HQ, Total Force Development at Navy.mil for assistance. You will receive credit for participating in this course. To receive credit, email the address here with the listed subject line, course name, and completion code. Or simply scan the QR code on your screen. This will automatically generate the email you need to send. Just be sure to include your Navy email address in the body of your email if you're using a personal device. Thank you, and have a great day.